You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show, ideas for happy horsekeeping.
The road we travel to success with horses is sometimes a long and arduous one. And when we turn a corner, it feels like we're actually getting closer to success, however we define success. In this special two-part episode, Buck Harris once again serves as host, helping me share my experiences with Siouxsie and explain how turning a big corner in our journey together represents a form of success on several levels. And we did it with the help of a very special master horseman, Tick Maynard. This first part of the episode goes back in time somewhat to get you all up to speed on how we got to this very particular place with Siouxsie, where she came from, what her situation was like, and what the trials and tribulations were that I went through, as well as Buck, to get to the place where we are today. There's a lot to cover, and it's a really interesting story, so listen in. This is episode 119 of the Stall and Stable Show, brought to you by American Stalls. American Stalls provides farm owners with hundreds of choices of premium quality stall components and accessories. From European stall fronts to paddock gates and custom doors and windows, everything they make is of the highest quality. In a world full of unpredictability, having a home that is predictably safe and comfortable means having a home outfitted by American Stalls. To learn more, visit them online at americanstalls.com.
Welcome back, listeners. Today is Wednesday, June 21st, 2023, and I'm your host, Buck Harris. Helena, welcome back to the Stall and Stable Show.
Thanks. What are you taking over? Am I fired? Do I still have a job?
Well, when we have these turning points, then I get all excited and I want to interview you so you can tell the story without having to think of it all yourself. Plus, I have a little bit of an outsider perspective on what's going on with your horse world, and I think it's fun to just bring it to everybody.
Yeah, listeners, when I went to a clinic this past weekend and with Tick Maynard, and Buck was always the supportive husband, friend, sounding board, and he gets really excited when I turn a corner with my horses, and this was a big corner, and he's like, "Let's do an episode. I want to host." So I'm turning it over to you completely.
Well, I think we should have given a spoiler alert, but that's okay. You did turn a corner, and it's a very exciting corner to have turned. So the way I want to go about this interview is to go back in time a little bit again. I like to go back in time with you and think a little bit about where you started learning about horse training. It's one thing to own a horse, and you've owned several horses in your time, some trained at different levels, but you've never really started a horse.
No, and I've never had green horses, like really green horses.
And you never had a mare. So Siouxsie, your first green horse, your first mare, and an off-track thoroughbred, what did you think you were getting into when you got her? What was your vision of what this was going to look like?
All I wanted was a horse that was a little in front of my leg. Honest to God. I love Brody to death. But he's not a very forward-thinking horse, which makes him perfect for hunting. He'll go with the flow. He's a steady Eddie. He's comfortable. He's sane. He'd get a little strong out there once we were galloping with a group, but he was very rateable. But doing other things, even if you're just hunting, you still need to keep your horse schooled in the ring for a number of reasons. You want to keep them physically fit, so you have to do lateral work, you have to do bending, you have to do transitions, you have to do a lot of stuff in the ring, even if you're just going straight through the woods at breakneck speeds with a group of other horses. That said, it was always very difficult for me to keep Brody forward, to create enough energy to work with him. And so as I started to look for a horse for myself, planning for Brody in his semi-retirement to be more of a family horse, a husband horse, a guest horse. I started to look for something a little bit more, with a little bit more built-in energy. So an off-track thoroughbred was perfect in my mind because I had heard wonderful things about them. I had ridden some already trained ones, loved them, like always really connected with them. And they were in my budget, to be honest. I could not afford a made horse.
Yeah. And it's hard to get a horse like Brody to bend. You can't bend a ball. Brody's a little bit of a ball, and it's so you wanted more of a challenge. I mean, if we could just size this up.
I did not want more of a challenge.
All right, what did you want?
A horse who was just a little more in front of my leg.
All right.
So Brody was a trail horse before I got him.
Okay.
So he had the brain. I just needed to teach him the skill set in the ring.
And so when you get him in the ring, you're constantly urging him to go, and that just takes the fun out of riding? Is that the simplest way?
It took the fun out of ring work.
Okay.
It took the fun out of that kind of exercise. And then coming here, leaving, our previous home, coming here, where we really don't have access to trails anymore, stingy landowning neighbors, that we had to do a lot more ring work. And but like I said, I wasn't looking for a challenge.
So how would you define the difference between Brody's personality and Siouxsie's personality?
Well, Brody's pretty calm, confident, not reactive. I don't want to say a little dull, just not super motivated to work.
A little set in his ways.
A little set in his ways. It's just not necessary for him to give you anything more than you absolutely need.
And then contrast that with Siouxsie. What's your two-sentence summation of her?
She is an overachieving, hypervigilant, wants to please, likes to work, very active mind kind of horse. But at the same time is also very chill and quite forgiving.
And when you take that and you combine it with green,
untrained, yeah.
What do you
get?
What did you get into there that you didn't really know you were getting into? I mean, you weren't looking for a challenge, but you got one.
I mean, I was looking for a small challenge. To be fair, I was looking for a small challenge. Like I knew that I was going to have work to do with an off-track thoroughbred. When I went to go try Siouxsie, it was told to me that she was already well started after her almost track career. She didn't race, but she was registered. She was trained at the track. So according to the seller, she had already had some experience in dressage and was doing little schooling shows. And
in retrospect, they walked, trot, cantered, and even jumped Siouxsie when we were there for the first time.
And that's fair. Siouxsie will comply. But also when we got her, she was sick. She was unhealthy. She was close, half dead.
Yeah.
So
the vet even said, "I really thought you were going to tell me you got a rescue." Severe with issues, and so that not being the case, she wasn't quite a rescue, but she wasn't far from being a rescue.
No, the only reason she wasn't a rescue is because I paid for her.
Yeah.
So anyway, after a solid, so I get her home, and I knew I was going to be a little overfaced. So the plan was, get this horse. A, she's in my budget. B, she was right size for me. She's about 15.2, 15.3 hands. She seemed really sweet when I tried her. Was she unwell? Yes. The vet was like, she'll be a nice little project horse for you. There's nothing majorly wrong with her that would prevent her from doing what you want, which at the time I thought was just all-around pleasure horse. Maybe she would be a field hunter, maybe not. If not, we can do a little eventing with her. And if that wasn't even possible, then some dressage, just poking around, with a nice all-around horse. So, of course, when I get her home, she had a multitude of health problems that contributed to her mental problems.
And so one of the things that I heard more than once was, if and when this horse gets healthy, she may be a lot more of a handful than you imagine. But when you first saw her, you said, "I'm getting this horse for her brain," right? Or for her.
Yep, I bought a brain.
Okay, so you recognize
I just
something.
bought the wrong brain.
you recognize something in her that you connected with that made this horse such that you wanted to put time and energy and effort in. And we looked at a bunch of horses that were really not suitable for you for a variety of reasons, mostly because they were just flipped out, going around upside down. And
those horses were checked out. They were robots. Yeah. They were all robots. They had been so overtrained, or a lot of them were shut down, even though they complied 100% with the rider's requests. Siouxsie
they didn't look safe to get on even. Some of them, we went to look at some horses and you were like, I'm not getting on this horse. And I was like, what? And then we would leave. But you knew.
Oh, God, the things that people thought that they could sell. So, yeah. So what I saw in her that was different than a lot of the other horses was that there was someone inside there still. Mm-hmm. And she wasn't gone. And she saw me.
So is it safe to say that we've had her, I think, 4 years now. Is it safe to say that you, this weekend, since you already did the spoiler, which is fine, is it safe to say that you connected with her in the way that you wanted to when you first got her? Like you finally got that connection?
No. So let me back up for a minute. When I brought Siouxsie home, knowing that this was my first thoroughbred. This was a mare. I pretty much worked by myself. I was keeping her in my backyard farm, that I was going to need the help of a professional to get her to where I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, what happened was a pandemic. And so my access to the professionals that I was hoping to work with to help me with this horse disappeared. So I spent a lot of time by myself trying to figure out this mare, her health issues, her training issues, her personality, all the things that I didn't know about horses because I'd had quarter horses, I had Brody. I've always had easy keepers. Yeah. And so this was like I had never done anything with horses before. Mm-hmm. So I was suddenly left on my own, and I had to seek out training methods. I had to seek out health and medical information for her, all kinds of things on my own. And then, and I found some really good stuff. I did. I found a whole bunch of stuff, and from there it was trial and error. I had to try on a bunch of different hats with her.
And that's kind of where I'm going with the conversation. So what motivated you to look under so many different rocks for answers? Like for me, as a very ignorant, for lack of a better word, person who's been involved and around horses for as long as I have, without any real knowledge of horse training or what you do, the fallback, and I think a lot of even horse trainers probably fall into this. The fallback is, I know what I want. I'm going to make my horse do it. And I would always feel like you just need to make her do more. You need to make her do more. And your default is not that. Your default has been from the beginning, there's something that's missing. The horse should want to do this. Siouxsie should accept a rider differently than she does. Siouxsie should go around more nicely than she does. Something is wrong. So you started off by looking, I think, under the rocks that would be physically, what's physically wrong with this horse? And what did you find there?
Longtime listeners will know that I use a phrase to describe what I went through. That's kind of common for a lot of private horse owners. It's called the diagnostic goose chase. And it's like, what's wrong with my horse today?
Yeah.
And you have to say, if the horse doesn't do what I want it to do, where do I look first? It's like, it's a decision tree. Is it me? Is it the saddle? Is it something that's physically wrong with them? I always go for, are they in pain first? Is it a leg? Is it a stomach? Is it their back? What's the pain issue? And so you start out with, saddle fit, or you start out with scoping them for ulcers, or you look for lamenesses. You look for lamenesses on the ground. You look for lamenesses under saddle. And you kind of go through this decision tree, and this is a lot of trial and error. Okay, let's ride her on a Tuesday, on a sunny day where it's 72 degrees in this saddle. Then you have to wait for the exact same conditions to ride her in a different saddle, right? It has to be a Tuesday. Right. It has to be sunny. It has to be 72 degrees.
If it's 45 degrees and breezy, you don't know. It's a totally different experiment at that point.
So that took a lot of time.
And you've tried many saddles, and you've tried different saddle fitters.
I left no stone unturned with his horse. And you asked me why. It's because there's this intuition, there's this feel, especially for me. I'm extremely empathetic. When you feel another person or another animal in your presence relax, you know it. When they are not relaxed, even a micromillimeter of anxiety or tension, I feel it. It's intuitive, it's instinctive. It is not something I can turn on and off. It is always there. So whenever I'm in Siouxsie's presence, I can feel when she is completely relaxed. And there were times in the first, year or two when I was with her that I could feel those moments of complete relaxation. And then I can feel her anxiety come into play. I can feel it, ebb and flow. So what I was looking for through all of this trial and error are those moments, whether on the ground or in the saddle, where I felt her relax in mind and body. And they were there, so it's not like she wasn't capable of it.
You would get one once in a while, and then I would be like, okay, we finally got all the problems solved, and then the next time you ride, it would be back, and then I'd be like, oh man, here we go again.
Yeah.
Like, how could this be possible? So in the scheme of the sticking with the physical stuff, right? So saddle fit was important, and you finally got the saddle that you're still not 100% confident about, but I think you're about 85% confident about, right? Yeah. What else did you find as far as what was the kind of just quickly through the timeline? I mean, the first thing was her gut, right? And having her scoped.
Yeah. So treating her stomach was a big one. And then her hindgut, and then learning about, I'm ADHD. So when there's something that's interesting to me, I will hyperfocus and deep dive into the content. So I did a lot of research into ulcers in horses and equine gastric ulcer disease, EGADS, whatever it is. And I discovered that a lot of a horse's immune system and overall health was tied directly to their digestive system. So it took almost 3 years to fully heal her hind gut. And
that involved a very disciplined approach to medications. I mean, you were doing going out in the morning, giving her the medication, not giving her any food yet, timing it, going back out, giving her hay, going back out, giving her, like, your dedication to that piece of it was off the charts, number one. And number two, you really couldn't have done that at a boarding barn.
No.
It would have been impossible because it really required almost like a skilled nursing facility, which is your home backyard barn. And as much as I know that backyard barn owners often get a little maligned for their, inability to actually manage a horse, in your case, it became paramount to healing Siouxsie. And so all the work you did around gut. And then how did you know when her gut was finally healed? And I believe that you're about 95% now that her gut is good.
Oh, I'm 100%. Her manure changed.
Okay.
Brody's always had this beautiful manure, like perfectly formed balls, the right color depending on what he's eating, the right moisture level. And when Siouxsie,
you feel the joy in the horse poop
horse people
tone
and
there.
Poop, man, that's a messed up relationship. So when I saw that Siouxsie's manure began to look a lot like Brody's, I knew that her body was processing the food that I was giving her in the right way, her attitude started to change, meaning she was a little less anxious every time I would approach her for any kind of work.
Well, and I'm going to bring up something here that is important. I think that if you own a horse and you're married, you have an outside pressure that you have to factor in to your horse care. I would go out and look at, knowing that Siouxsie was in this healing process, I'd go out and look at the manure and be like, oh my God, look at this manure. It's beautiful. And Helena would go out and be like, yeah, well, it's starting to get there. I was always trying to convince Helena that the horse was fine. Wasn't I? I mean, to my discredit, I'll throw myself under the bus here. I was always trying to convince her that the horse was fine because to me, it just seemed like nitpicking. But it really was not nitpicking in retrospect, right? I know what I know now. I did not know what I did not know then. And in retrospect, Helena was really sticking to her guns in spite of this somewhat subtle, somewhat obvious pressure that I was putting under, that the horse was, the Siouxsie was actually healing and fine. And I think that Helena was recognizing that there was some progress along the way, but she wasn't going to settle for this is good enough. And so a lot of credit to any horse owner who can stand in the face of the pressure that they feel from their environment. And that's a husband, a partner. It could be the person who actually owns the horse if you're training someone else's horse. And it comes back a lot of times to money and time. And those pressures are very real when you own a horse. So stick to your guns, stick to what you know, and don't let those pressures sway your impressions, because Helena never did that. And we've gotten to a point now where there was this turning point, but 2 or 3 years ago, there was a lot of inner work that has to be done in order to stay the course and make sure that until the horse is completely healed, and you tried some things that maybe you didn't need to try along the way. How else would you know? But you don't even know necessarily 100% which of those you could have skipped, right? Because they were all part of the learning process.
You try to eliminate as many variables as you can so that you know that what you're trying is either working or not working. Because I don't have the benefit of being in a boarding barn where I have other eyes on my horse and other people's experience to talk to, to process in addition to mine, it's so having this challenge here probably took me a lot longer to figure out than if I were among other horse people who had experienced similar things, or professionals who deal with, 12, 20 horses a year. I'm dealing with 3 horses a year. Now, the benefit of having them in my backyard is that I get to watch everything they do every minute of the day. So my observational skills are my superpower. So a professional might be seeing 20 or 30 horses in a year, but they're seeing them not to the depth that perhaps I see my horses. That doesn't mean I have as much knowledge as a professional who's dealing with many horses, but it means that I have a fair amount of knowledge about my particular horses. It just, again, working on my own meant that figuring things out was going to take me a lot longer than if I had the benefit of a community to work within. But it also meant that I had to rely more on myself. So I had to do my homework, and I had to come up with questions that were going to help me figure Siouxsie's issues out as best as I could. That meant drumming up the courage to reach out to my vet more often, to maybe cross boundaries of appropriateness. Like, I really need to get this answer. And if I'm being a little pushy or a little forward, I have to do that. I have to take this risk because my horse needs me to get the answers to help her. And I could at any time have said, she's just going to be a pasture pet. If she's uncomfortable being ridden or worked, then I need to respect that. But that's not what I'm in this game for. I love my horses. I respect them, I honor them, but I want to ride them.
I just want to ride. I've heard that so many times, and my heart breaks when I hear it, because you do just want to ride. But from a universal perspective, looking back, You really want to learn. And so, we want one thing, but subliminally we're asking for something else. So you want to ride, but you are a lifelong learner, and getting on a made horse that's sound and doesn't have any issues, which I don't think there's a lot of those out there. Now that I've been involved with this a little bit more, I do think though that Siouxsie has brought you a really interesting set of circumstances to work through. And now you know a lot. I want to touch on one more physical thing, and then we're going to move on to the next topic of this journey, to overuse a word, journey. There was another problem. She was falling out behind, and I would not see it. Like you would say, you'd ride her, and then you'd say she was falling out behind again today. And I'd be like, I'm sitting there. I would see it like a really exaggerated version of it, but you could feel it when you were in the saddle. And what did that trigger for you, and what did you do to try to resolve that? And what course of action did you take?
I had some lameness evaluations done a few times.
You ditched the shoes at one point. Was that part of it?
I ditched the shoes right away. One vet had prescribed shoes with wedges. I had her plantar and palmar angles x-rayed, to see what those angles were and if maybe there was something going on in the bone that was creating her stifles. Her stifles were slipping, and she had basically the stay apparatus was catching, and some people call it sticky stifles. One vet prescribed shoes. That didn't work. And so the more I researched stifle issues in horses, the more I was like, all the stuff that I'm doing is not helping her. So let's find another vet. And so I went to the top orthopedic vet in my state and finally had him come out and do an evaluation. And he said, let's get in there with an ultrasound. We x-rayed it. We found nothing extraordinary. But he said, let's get in there with an ultrasound. And sure enough, we found an old meniscus tear, which he said was very old and probably from her race training and could have very well been the reason she didn't end up racing at all. So he said she was not a candidate for surgery because the tear was so old, and also because it was in a place where they couldn't really access it. So he said, however, there's a lot of swelling and inflammation in there, but I think we might be able to get her to a place where she's comfortable. I have no idea, he said, what her potential as an athlete would be, but I do think that we can get her comfortable and she can be, a nice walk, trot, canter horse. Maybe you can do some dressage. So I was like, all right, well, let's just see I just want to get her comfortable. I didn't need to jump her. I don't need to event her. At this point, all I wanted to do was have a ride on a horse who was relaxed and happy.
But I'm going to interrupt you because there's still an emotional roller coaster you're on at this point. I mean, to get that news was kind of devastating, and I think you had to really work through it personally. I'm drawing a parallel here between all of the effort that goes into finding out what's going on with this horse and the emotional part of it as a horse owner and how this affects you. It's, you're pouring energy and money and time and love and all this stuff into this animal, and then you get this diagnosis, which at some point it's kind of like, well, thank God I kind of know what's going on now.
Yeah.
And it's not career ending, but it certainly isn't news that I wanted.
There was never any clarity in what we found. It was always ambiguous. Oh, we found this, but it's not career ending, but we have no idea if she's even going to be able to do walk trot. So what kept me going was hope. Well, we're not closing the door on this horse, so we might as well keep looking for something. And those moments where I could get her comfortable, she was amazing. I mean, amazing. But we'd have those 3 or 4 rides that I would have on her were amazing. And then the 5th and 6th rides would be complete chaos, totally uncomfortable. And so then I'm like, what? I thought I fixed this. And then I would come in with my hands in the air or my head in my hands crying. And you would be like, Jesus Christ, not again.
So this is a great segue because there's the whole physical healing. And I'm going to say from my looking back, it took about, if we've had Siouxsie for 4 years, it took about 3.5 years to really get, Actually, you're just there now. So really almost a full 4 years to get to a point where she's physically comfortable. So then there's the training piece. And you're not an experienced horse trainer, but you're tasked now with training this horse. The staying power, again, I just go back to the staying power and the commitment to your vision for what this is going to look like. How did the training process work from the beginning? Can you go back and remember like what you were doing and then how that evolved and the different types of training methods that you've brought into the equation now? I mean, that's a big question, but.
I did have some trainers come here. I did haul Siouxsie out to a couple of places as well. And I got pretty much the same feedback from all the trainers I tried around here. And that was, you're too timid. She's just green. You have to push through it. She has a bad attitude. She is a salty mare. Oh, thoroughbred racehorses. Oh, thoroughbred mares.
She's being marish.
So I was too timid. She was too salty. And that was kind of it. But that didn't sit right with me because how is it that I could ride this horse by myself in my backyard and she's just as calm and relaxed as can be, and then the next day she's this salty animal? What was creating the salt? Or they say she has a bad attitude. I'm like, well, horses don't have attitudes. They're animals. They have no idea what they should or should not do. You use that word in the beginning. Siouxsie should be doing this. Siouxsie should be doing that. And should implies a level of expectation. And those expectations are human. Horses have no idea about human expectations. I didn't know that at the time. So I just wasn't comfortable with what these professionals were telling me. And I certainly was not comfortable with how they were making me feel as a horse owner who was trying to find a solution for this horse.
Give me more of that. What do you mean, making you feel?
They made me feel incompetent. They were demeaning. They were harsh. One was kind. She wanted to be kind, but I frustrated her because at this point my confidence was shot and I couldn't. She wanted me to push through Siouxsie's, the way her behaviors, what was manifesting while I was trying to ride her. They wanted me to push her through it. And I was so intimidated at that point that I couldn't. And so I frustrated this particular instructor. So, of course, I listened to podcasts. I've been podcasting for 14 years. And Coach Jen, I trust implicitly. She has taught me so much about horsemanship. And through Stable Scoop, we had a lot of trainers on, and I would, listen to these shows. I would do these interviews, and I would be like, I remember so-and-so said this. And we had Mary Kitzmiller on one day, and she said to do that. And then we had Shauna Karish on 12 years ago.
Wow.
It was the first time I was introduced to Shauna. And I wanted to bring her here to Rhode Island to do a clinic back then. So I'm starting to hear these different things. And at the same time, I'm just feeling more and more isolated because I've pretty much gone through all of the trainers in my area. And then the publisher, Horse and Rider Books, calls me one day. And they say, we really like the work that you do, and we'd like to connect with you more. Well, what can we do? Can we send you some books? Maybe introduce you to some of our authors? We would love for you to interview them on your show. And I'm such a fan of Horse and Rider Books. They have a commitment to quality and the best interest of the horse at heart. So I was honored. I said, yeah, send me what you got. Even if it's off topic. I mean, this was when I made the shift from Stable Scoop to Stall and Stable and went out on my own and started talking about best practices in horsekeeping. Because, too, I started to see that as I was shaping my backyard environment for Siouxsie and Brody and all of the horses that I've kept, I noticed that my horses would become more relaxed, healthier, more present. I saw them respond to the changes that I was making in their environment.
That's brilliant. I guess I understood that, but in the context of what I was thinking about for this conversation that we're having now, I really didn't bring that piece of the equation into it. So yes, you've created I'll call it a healing environment for your horses. And through that you've set them up for success. So certainly that's something that anyone should be looking at when they go to ride their horse. What is the environment when I'm not here, if I'm boarding? What is the environment in my backyard if I've got a horse that I'm keeping at home? What am I doing to my horse that could be supporting or undermining its success when I ride?
And from having worked in barns and managed barns, there are certain best practices that I knew intuitively were important. I mean, obviously, I also studied pony club content, even though I was not a pony clubber.
You're an honorary pony clubber because you've done so much.
Yeah, I'm an honorary pony clubber. But there were best practices that I thought were important, like good communication and consistency and care and handling. So it was there that I learned that the environment was just as important as the training. So I'm going to just stop you there, because when you say environment, just give me what is that? What's the ideal environment? Everything from the fencing to the grass that they're grazing, to the shelter that you provide for them, to their herd mates. A place where your horse can be a horse and relax. Is that a place where your horse's needs are met? Your horse's needs are met. Okay. So, okay. I got it. And that's not always the case, right? You have a lot of situations where you'll have your horse where their needs, they're being fed and they're being turned out, but not. Not right? All of them are even being fed properly. Not all of them are being turned out. And so I came to learn about those needs through my own experience with keeping my horses at home, through my research, and the hundreds of experts I've had on my show. And those needs, to be fair to others, to everyone, as a community, the horse industry did not know as much about what our horses needed even 5 years ago or 3 years ago as we know today. Technology has allowed us to see inside of their bodies the way we could never before. And then not just that, but other kinds of research and other kinds of experiential research. Trainers who are doing the trial and error kind of stuff that I'm doing at home, they're doing in their careers, they're now able to take the results of their work and share them with the rest of the world. So we know a lot more about what horses need today than we did several years ago. So how do we then take those needs, look at the environment in which we're keeping these horses, and say, hey, my horses don't need 90-degree angles in their fencing. They need rounded corners in their fencing. Now, a lot of professional horsemen have known this. But what else? What about the sugars in the grasses? What about easy keepers? Should they be grazing tall grass? What about the hard keepers? How much sugar are we putting in their diet in grain? So even the grain that we can provide for our horses has changed in recipe because we now know more about what's not good for them and what's good for them. Simple example that you've brought out many times with me is when a horse can have its head down and graze, even if there's very, very little to eat, but their head is down and they're nibbling on, like right now, our little pasture paddock is pretty beaten down, but it rains, the sun comes out, and there's little bits of stuff coming up. The horses are happy out there because they're salivating. They're chewing, yeah. They're chewing and they're salivating. And who would know that? Who would even think of that except someone like you who've done all this research? And then now when I look out there and I see them, in the past I'd be like, boy, they really need more grass to eat. But they don't necessarily need more grass to eat. They need to be happily with their herd chewing. I mean, is our situation ideal? Obviously not, but it's still better than having them standing in a stall or standing in a dry paddock all day. Yes. I used to think that a big farm with lots of pasture for all the horses on the property was the ideal. But I now know that property needs to have a turnout area of different kinds because different horses have different needs. So Brody, while he is not, thankfully, He doesn't have any kind of insulin resistance or metabolic disorders, which his breed and type are prone to. He cannot live on lush grass. So he needs a grazed down junky paddock where he can just nibble on something to keep himself chewing and happy, but where he's not getting so much sugar that it would compromise his body. Siouxsie maybe needs a little more. She might need a little more vitamin E in some of the taller grasses. And this is where having my horses in my backyard and knowing each of them on a very deep level what their needs are, I now believe that a horse property, if it can, should have different types of grazing areas for horses who have different nutritional needs. Again, I don't like to anthropomorphize, but I feel like the horse world in general needs to look at horses a little bit more like we look at humans in order to empathize with and understand their needs as athletes. We sit on their back. That automatically makes them athletes. So you could have an athlete that is like a ballerina. You can have an athlete that's more like a golfer or a weightlifter. You can have an athlete like that's a marathoner or an athlete who is a rower. And their body types and their mental types are all different. And when you find the right body type and mental type and you match it up with a sport or a discipline that suits that body type and mental type, you got a great fit. Well, you also have to look at your property, your farm, as like a gym. Some horses need a pool, some horses need a track, some horses need free weights, and that means some horses need sand footing, some horses need tall grass, some horses need herd mates. So, this is a level of knowledge that I have gained through very hyper-focused attention.
Well, and so we've got this thoroughbred mare who's a little bit compromised, and it's all kind of moving in the right direction, but we really needed an arena. And that's the only way that this horse is going to get anywhere. So we put in an arena. And then when we first decided to do that, I'm like, oh my God, are we really doing this? And then now that we have it, it's like, how could we have possibly imagined, or I should say how could I have possibly imagined bringing this horse along without it? Because uneven footing would just have created a complexity for her build, her type, for her athletic nature that she would have never overcome. We'd still be circling around.
And her knee and her stifle, she had this meniscus tear, and my job was to make sure that we developed her hind end musculature, her quadriceps in particular. So the more fit and stronger her quadriceps got, the more the stifle joint would be stabilized and less likely to slip and less likely to aggravate that old tear that was in there. But I could not develop her musculature without the arena, because uneven footing, even on grass with some divots and the things that we had, that was too much stress on the joint to develop without pain. And of course, when Siouxsie experiences any kind of pain or discomfort, she's very articulate about it. She communicates it, and then she gets anxious about it because she's going to anticipate that work under saddle means ouchie knee.
So to recap here, and then we're going to march forward, probably pushing our time limit already. We've got the physical health of the animal, which has taken a few years, and it will be ongoing, but is under control and has moved in a very, very positive direction. And then the second piece of this is the environment that's created for our horse that is super important. So I think the two obviously go hand in hand. You can't separate them, but at the same time, they're of equal importance. One is not more important than the other, and you can't have one without the other. So now we're really going to dive in, and I talked a little bit about training, but the third piece of this is Helena turned a corner this past weekend at the Tick Maynard Clinic, and it was probably the most dramatically beautiful change you could imagine. I liken it to someone who's learning to speak a language and they're always stumbling around and they kind of get it and they don't get it and they say things wrong and they don't have their syntax right. But people can kind of understand them. And then one day they walk into an environment where everyone is speaking that language and they hear it and they can speak it and they got it. Like they're like, I finally got Spanish, or I finally got French or German, whatever it is. They just suddenly they have a command of that language that they've been working toward for years and years. So we go to the Tick Maynard Clinic.
Well, why didn't I even go to the Tick Maynard Clinic? How did I even get connected? This is where we throw it back to Horse and Rider books. This was where I went off on a detour. And it's a great story, but one you're going to have to wait for because it comes up in part 2 of this episode. For part 2, just go to whatever podcast player you get your Stall and Stable episodes from, and you will find it ready and waiting for you to continue this discussion. Many thanks to our sponsor, American Stalls, for continuing to support the Stall and Stable show. But listeners, we could use your support as well. So if you like this episode, I hope that you will share it with a friend or a colleague. You can share it on social media, you can share it by email, or at the barn. And that's going to be a wrap for part 1 of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll be back for part 2.